So there's a consistency to them. But the Hours Mass was meant to be something for the monks of monasteries, which the sort of centralized maintenance of any kind of education typically happened in monasteries. And this is up until about 1,000, 1,100. I'll get to more of this later, but cities start to develop, population stabilizes a little bit, and we start to get cathedrals. And cathedrals is where we start to get the public involved with these presentations. But the Hours Masses were daily, they're about 8 hours long. Got to fill them with something. So why not fill them with performances? So this is mostly monks performing for other monks the biblical stories and lessons. So, just like we just kind of did, you'd be given a section of the Bible and told, here, dramatize this, and you'll perform it in a couple of the days. Eventually from there, it grew into anachronistic depictions, meaning contemporary characters being placed in biblical settings to make things more familiar to those around them. And again, it's sort of meant to teach you the whole notion of all of the things that you're supposed to be doing in this life to eventually make it to the afterlife. So by placing these contemporary characters in the biblical settings, it's making it more immediate for the audience. All right, so how did we get out of the monasteries and out into the general public? Well, as I said, so as feudal lords married their daughters off to the neighboring feudal lord and creating a union, and we have other areas being conquered and gradually, partially under the Holy Roman Empire, even though that dissipated, it did lay a groundwork for what could be sort of a unifying element later on. There is some social stability as the governance of Europe becomes more centralized. We now have towns and cities and kingdoms into nations, so people have a greater sense of identity. And the Catholic Church, although there's plenty of friction between the Vatican and Rome, and particularly in areas of Germany, about who should be considered the Pope or whatever. You may, again, from your World Civ class, remember about the Great Schisms, fun word, where German popes declared themselves to be valid and the Roman Church invalid, but Rome eventually ruled the roost, as it were. That started to an influx of money where cathedrals, as gathering places for these people that lived in cities and towns, start to be developed. And again, as part of the spread of Christianity, you would invite the townspeople and so forth into the cathedral, where the church at this time, as I mentioned, is really the only source of education. But we've got Spanish being spoken, we've got some form of English being spoken, we've got 3 or 4 different kinds of German being spoken, Flemish, we've got, still got Greek and Italian and even French and some variations of French. These are the spoken languages of the common people. They go into Mass, Mass is in Latin. What the fuck's going on? You know what's going on? I know what's going on. So, with the fact that Mass is being spoken and taught in Latin, finally, and again this is a course of decades, if not a couple hundred years, the church kind of goes, we really want to affect these people. We got to bring the material to them in their own languages. Okay? So we start to develop vernacular plays, but as I said, and I'll get to that more in a moment. But these plays during Mass ceremonies and during festivals started to be used as an education tool to teach those that are not familiar with what the messages of the Bible and what the sort of stance of Christianity is all about. For example, there are over 400 known Three Mary plays visiting Jesus' tomb. So after Jesus is taken down in the crucifixion, he's buried, he's visited by three Marys where he rises on the third day. So the miracle that teaches is that Jesus died for your sins, and because of the notion of forgiveness, you will be resurrected. Okay? So, now these didn't take place all the time. These are probably, again, just during festival times or once a year. But slowly and surely, we start to develop more sophisticated versions of these little pocket plays that are strung together to basically make one super play. And those are called the mansion plays. So, if you've ever been to an older cathedral in Europe, you'll know that there's several like pocket areas on the sides where there's big seating areas in the middle. Now those seating areas today have been installed, whereas they used to basically be an open floor. Okay? A rolling wagon or a platform located in the side pockets around the cathedrals would represent one of the scenic elements of these various plays. So you would have the story of Jonah and the whale over here. You would have the story of Jesus' birth over here, although most of those are involved with the three wise men kings that visited him. There's actually very few that actually depict the actual manger scene. And ultimately, you get what we have up here, which is a demonstration. Go away. You see, this is one of the kind of cathedrals decked out, whereas you would have the altar area would probably be some depiction of heaven. You have the mouth of hell and all of these other sort of little platform areas that are meant to depict one specific story from the Bible, all the way around to the other side of the cathedral. So this could support, several dozen performances.
I guess I'm a little bit curious about which came first, but this is like the same idea behind the stained glass windows.
Yeah. So I would say stained glass windows came first. I know that for certain.
Well, they have to build.
Yeah.
So let's say if performed, where exactly would the audience, or at this page,
the audience would traverse from one area to the next, or the house platforms here.
Mm-hmm.
They would go to where the performance was happening. Okay. That's partially why there's not a set seating area. So most of the time, the lines of dialogue were chanted in tone to some kind of, sort of drone music, and that's not something that's terribly unfamiliar to everybody. And eventually, for those that were in more rural areas, or there was a town that didn't happen to have an actual cathedral, they'd have pageant wagons, which were these elaborate sort of three-story, very large portable stages, which would be dragged partially by the actors, as well as by some mules and things like that, into a town where it would be set up and performed kind of in the town square for the population of that town. And this was as a means to really try to convince those that were still holding on to their paganistic ways to join the fold of Christianity. Okay? So, some examples of pageant wagging. You can kind of see this depiction here is that there would be an under area that would be depicting of hell, usually. A stage area where the main action took place with a tiring house, which was basically a dressing room behind the curtain area. And you can't quite see it here. I'll show you another picture. But usually there's an upper area for musicians because music was considered heavenly, as well as a place to depict heaven. So if we take a look back here at this particular little drawing for a second, you can see the cutaway section that you've got this sort of attic, if you will, oftentimes with a crane so that you could lift angels up into heaven, or with an area beneath with the stage platform, which you can see was usually kind of folded up here and then would drop down, where hell would be depicted. And this area here would be the tiring house. Okay? So, this is more so, I would say, in the probably starting around the 1200s. 1200s to 1500s is where pageant wagons are really popular. When I was in grad school, I had this guy who was in my class who had Tourette's. He's a good guy, but that was a word that just he would blurt out over and over. He recognized it and knew it was kind of funny, but he'd be sitting there